we're starting the meeting of work group 3, and we will have a bit a joint presentation. So I will start, but then I will hand over to the visualization team and later to Müge, who is the vice chair of this working group. And before that, we will also have a short reflection. We call it a reflection of Bernard from France, from Paris, on single family housing. But this is the agenda. So again, to remind you all, and in particular those who have not attended maybe all the meetings in between, on what is the agenda. So what were the members? Who are the members of this working group? What are the tasks and what are the achievements we have done so far? Then, as already announced, we have the policies collection, which is really one of our core tasks, and the visualization of them. And we have a wonderful team that was working on these visualizations the last 4 months. Well, under, let's say, the guidance of Kritikar, and Luisa joined, who was also involved in the development of these visualizations. Ahmed, who is there, yeah, Luisa, Ahmed. And online, I think we have Guanola and Marriage, and maybe Giuseppe we will see later. So they will explain what they did. Then we have the reflection on single family housing. Maybe just to say shortly, that was a discussion coming up while collecting the policies. Is that included? Why is it not included? I hope Bernard's insight will help us to further decide on that. And then we will have a large part of this session, which is called filling the gaps. You will see why, because we still have a lot of gaps. I think we are happy with what we have collected so far, but there is still space for improvement. And then afterwards, I will hand over to Müge to talk about the things to come. I think once we have collected the policies, which is called the narrative group. We already heard about text in work group 1 and 2, but we also in work group 3 think that we will need some explanatory text next to the collection of policies and the visualizations. So the members, it's not as beautiful as Ines' chart, but you see we are a big group. We are currently have 58 members, and within 2022 we have another 40 members who joined. So that means we have a lot of potential in this group. I think we nearly cover every country, and that means it should be possible also to get some insights into the policies of every country. And yeah, some of them I think we haven't met, others had attended other meetings. This is the status of the working group. Then just to remind you from the very beginning, you know, everything is formulated in the Memorandum of Understanding, which in this case, the title of the group is Leverage Contemporary Architectural Interventions and Public Policy. So actually it's not about the history and not about describing how the policies were, but it's just to understand how the policies were in order to be able to modify them, to change them, to leverage them, to improve them. So this is just now the basic task. That means within the next year, based on the visualizations, based on the narrative that we have created, we want to look into the future and give also some recommendations and insight into how policy should look like in the future related to housing. And I want to highlight one aspect here. This is ITC countries. So in particular, in this working group, it is mentioned that we have a specific emphasis, a focus on ITC countries. And you will see later, we are missing still some policies of ITC countries. So that would be really great. Please think about it. We will come back later in the discussion to that question, who could further contribute. And then we have, of course, tasks like every other group, dissemination. So that means taking part in the events, taking part in workshops and conferences, in papers. I think this is a standard. And in addition to that, we have the workshops and the STSM, which were also dedicated. I start now from the end. So to talk about the events, which were already mentioned also by Anna yesterday, but members of Working Group 3 means we're involved of most of these activities that took place in the lieu et enjeu meetings and seminars held in Paris, also in all the conferences, but also in the conference that was organized by Melinda in Budapest, the DOCONF, Optimistic Suburbia. So I think we are quite fine with this kind of contributions. It might be that we could be able to publish a bit more, but there is an opportunity of a special issue of the Docomomo Journal next year, which we still have to decide on the title, but that will be linked to this cost action and that may have a focus on policies. This will be to be discussed within the core group. And it would be wonderful if we could have contributions really which go cross countries, because this is the idea of a cost action, to have us meet and to get to know each other and then to maybe come up with contributions. And since we started the comparison of the policies, I think it could be a wonderful idea to follow up on that and to use it to contribute then to this special issue, which is supposed to be published then for the next for the next meeting, for the next conference early next year in Frankfurt. It was supposed to be in Frankfurt in Germany. Then we have had 3 wonderful STSM, short-term scientific missions. The first one actually was Anica who's here, who moved from Detmold to Belgrade and was organizing a stakeholder workshop related to Serbian policies on housing, which I think will be something interesting maybe for our next stakeholder workshop that is supposed to be in Ankara later. We have had Luisa, who came from Salerno to Detmold and was starting the comparison and the visualizations, which were presented in the Milan meeting. And we just recently, a few weeks ago, had Celine, who moved from Antwerp to Delft to work on the Belgium and Dutch policies, together with talking about the narratives and contributing also to the Dutch policies. So that is fine, but I hope we can have more STSM. I think this will be discussion on the MC meeting tomorrow to hear how much budget we have and if there is more space for STSMs. Then we have to organize workshops. So as said, there was a first workshop last May here in Belgrade related to Workgroup 3. We consider the workshop we have just after this presentation, so from 4 to 5 more or less, which is a joint workshop of the working groups, to be a workshop of ourselves. And I think that is good. So it's not just presenting, but also to be active. Then there will be the stakeholder workshop in Ankara in September this year. And maybe, but that is to be discussed, it is an option maybe to have another workshop in Frankfurt next year. The date still has to be defined. It's a bit complicated with all the deadlines of the action and the prolongation of the action, but it will be somewhere next year. But there is also space if anybody of you has ideas to do another workshop that is related to the leverage of policies, to do this workshop somewhere else. Yeah, so that is not defined yet. Now another achievement, yeah, there's an image missing, doesn't matter, the poster book. I think many of you might have seen, we have already in 2019, 2020 collected information about your institutions, about like, what are you doing? Are you a research center? Are you a university? What kind of research are you doing related to public, to mass, middle-class mass housing? This has contributions from 31 countries, 62 posters. So we have a layout, but we were always waiting on how to publish it, to define the final layout, to relate it to the other working group results. So that is still something to do. I hope that we can maybe have an STSM that will be working on the final publication. But a lot of work has been done, actually, again, by Olga from Moldova, who's not here, from Luisa, from Ahmed, so together with us as chairs of the working group. Now, coming to the core part of our working group, which are the policies and the collection of policies. And I will not talk so much about how it looks like, because this will, the visualization team will do. So Kritika, Luisa, Ahmed, Gwenola, Marriage, and Giuseppe, as far as they are here. And but important was that we had created this template, an Excel sheet to collect the policies. But of course, the Excel sheet is not supposed to be published. It's a bit boring and nobody will read it. So this is why we came up with a way of analyzing it. And now please don't start discussing on the clusters, because I have had a lot of discussions already on the clusters. The clusters are actually just a way of starting the comparison. And we mainly did it geographically. And just to say, we took out Russia here for several reasons, because the European Union now has a very strict policy on how to involve or include Russia. Actually, we had a member that is non-Russian, but that has had experience in Russia. So we have a collection of policies from Russia, but most likely we will not be able to use it in this cost action. The other thing is that this idea was mainly based on geographical ideas to just start. We could have made clusters that are alphabetically. So we could have compared Albania with Turkey, or we could have compared, I don't know, Bosnia-Herzegovina with Denmark. I mean, it's, but this was a way where we thought that maybe a geographical distribution, of course, we thought about former socialist countries which may have similarities, or former Yugoslav countries which may have similarities. But this is not a result. This is a method. Yes, this is very important for me to say. It's just the method to start the comparison. And in the end, we will look at the individual countries and we will see what kind of results do we have? In which case, does a comparison make sense or not? Yes, so the policies collection. By today, we have 18 countries completed. And I have highlighted in orange the ITC countries, because as I said, with special attention to ITC countries, I think it's our duty to be successful with this action, that at least we have 50-50, I would say, because we have quite a lot. We have even, I think, more ITC countries in the action than other countries. And you see, for the moment, we have 18 countries completed, among them 8 ITCs. So this is why I really would like to emphasize in the next slide and address this speech to those workgroup members from the countries that we are still missing, which is actually those ones. So if I'm incorrect, because maybe somebody has sent the policy and we have not noticed it, let me know. But according to our last review, there are still 15 countries missing from the total action, and among them are 12 ITC countries. So Albania, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Bulgaria, Croatia, well, Denmark is not ITC, this is a mistake, Estonia, Latvia, Montenegro, Moldavia, North Macedonia, Serbia, Slovakia, and Malta. And then also Israel. And is Israel also ICC? No, I don't think so. Oh, well, I'm not sure. But Denmark is not.
Macedonia is not.
Macedonia is not?
No.
Okay, but it doesn't matter. We also collect other policies from non-ITC countries. So we would be happy also to have, okay, good. We have to correct it, but nevertheless, it doesn't change anything major in the numbers. It would be great to have more policies from ITC countries. And I think now back to the agenda. This was the short introduction, and I would hand over to Kritika, Luisa, Ahmed, to now explain how they were approaching to bring the Excel into some visual features. Yeah? Okay, we try to do that in 30 minutes, and speak into the microphone, don't move from there.
Yeah. This is, so hello everyone, by the way, I'm Kritika, and as you probably have seen my name everywhere in the emails, asking for policies, asking for information, and so on. So I'm happy to be here today, and now I will just give you an overview of what we were doing in the last couple of months. I was trying to connect with different people who were either already working on the policies or were really interested or curious to know how we can visualize them. And so we decided to, formulate a team, and every once in 2 weeks we were meeting every Tuesday. And our task was to basically translate this too many words into a little less words, but a more visual presentation. And we decided to have like a timeline from the post-World War to like for the 100 years, basically. And then we looked at like if we can put the historical timeline and the keywords from the policies that we were analyzing. Then also we were thinking of, trying to visualize the historical aspects of each country, because I think it's very important what was happening politically, historically in every country, because that directly relates to the housing situation in every country. And this has been a discussion throughout. But we didn't want it to just, make a bar and just say like, oh, in this year, this happened, blah, blah. But instead to give some images to and a little bit context to the history and the politics. But after this 2 stages or 3 stages, we were also discussing how we can actually analyze, how we can come up with some comparison aspects. And so the question about housing densification came up, first of all, whether it was single family, whether it was high rises, whether there was urban sprawl, whether the city centers were densified. And so these were like just the questions that came up when we had certain keywords from different countries. And this, I'm talking about the whole, 20 countries that we had policies for. I will not go too much in detail because this we will discuss again at the workshop, so which we have after the working group 3. The second topic that came up was the social group, which was targeted, because for example, in the socialist countries, it was very different from what was happening in the northern Western Europe. And so this could be an aspect to compare across Europe, because there were certain countries where engineers and professors and privileged, like they were considered the privileged class, and they had the opportunity to have single family houses compared to the average middle class who was living in mass housing. Then the third question came up was the ownership, like who owns the housing? Is it the state? Is it the individual? Are there renting policies? Because, for example, in Germany, we have a lot of rental reforms that happened after the war, and also in the case of Switzerland, for example. But in the socialist countries, there was no discussion about rental apartments, so to say. And directly from socialism, it jumped to capitalism, and there was no in between. So then the fourth aspect that we came up was the quality of life. How good the neighborhoods are, or if we again go back to what Ines was presenting this morning about the typologies, then we thought like the policies also talk sometimes about what is the living standard, what was the spaces that were suggested, like the minimum living standards, and the daylight, which is very new, like it probably came in like last 30 to 40 years in most of the European countries. But it can be an important aspect because this will help us to look into the future, like how we can actually transform these policies ahead. So the idea was, this is again just an example, the idea was how we can compare these countries, clusters that we form, which is, of course, as Uta mentioned, is just a draft. But again, it will be the whole point, or the whole the collaboration or this action is about how we can overlap information. And this was just a starting point. If we look into like housing densification, social groups, ownership, and quality of life, can we compare this? Can we get these data for all the countries that we have? And which is, I think, a very big target. And we soon realized that probably it's too ambitious to do that. So then what we decided is to come up with each country and look at what data we have, and can we actually look basically overlap it with the historical and the policy timeline and see what was the pattern, basically just to understand what was the pattern, what was happening in general in one country. And then if we can, we kind of try to compare the different clusters or different countries. But this was just a draft or a proposal, and we still the workshop today is actually about not only finding this comparison, but also like if we can overlap the overall working group 1, 2, and 3. So when we actually started, like this was the beginning. And in February, we actually started like, okay, in Belgrade, we have to present something. So what do we do? And we had like roughly 9 weeks, and we were just like 4 people, me, Louisa, Ahmed, and I think Merit. And then we tried to contact everybody, and probably you must have received my email somewhere. So what we did was, this is just to give you an overview of what exactly we were doing and the process. And then we tried to have a meeting once in 2 weeks, and to have set goal and target about what really we want to present in Belgrade. And then I will just go to Miro, which is, I don't know if everybody is aware about Miro. I don't know if everybody is familiar, because now we are in a totally digital world, and it's a very useful platform to work, and especially for a group like this, where we have so many different people, and not everybody is here, and not everybody is able to contribute by sending emails. So maybe this is a very good platform to put down work together. And so what we decided was, just a second, I will just. Yeah, so if you, I will share the link later when we start the workshop, but just to give you an overview, what we decided that every cluster has, certain countries, some of them have 4, some of them have just 2, depending upon, how many policies we received, or how, if we even have a representative from each country. And then we tried to look into, like the historical timeline, the policy timeline, and if we could manage to discuss with different representatives to ask if we can compare the cluster or not. And so this is just to give you an idea, but now I will hand it over to the cluster leader, which is for the southern countries, Louisa. And now Louisa will tell you more details about the 4 countries.
Okay, this is no, this is. Okay, this is the microphone, and this is the screen.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I want to start to say thank you to my colleague, cluster colleague, that really are active in this action, and they are really they are helping us so much in trying to have this visualization. And I'm in charge of the cluster 1 that involve Portugal, Italy, Spain, and Greece. Okay. As my colleagues say, we started our analysis asking to all the country to fill this Excel file with the main policies about the middle class mass housing. And the first idea to compare was to design this timeline and put the policies in a chronological order. And we have a standard timeline with the main important European events, and such as the First World, the Second World War, and the other economic European important moment. Well, we put in this main timeline the national timeline, starting from an historical point of view, with the first visualization of the most important historical event that had an impact on the mass housing public policies. And we overlapped in this historical timeline the policies with the data and the main keywords related to the question that was in the file Excel, the main objectives and the main measures. We did the same with for Italian when together with my colleague, for example, we decided to add the historical timeline, also the new law in 1975 that reorganized the public administration, given the decisional power on the housing issues to the local and the regional level. And we overlapped the policies timeline to the historical timeline. We did the same for the Spanish also, with the main historical event, with the end of the civil wars, the republic, the fall of a dictatorship, and the joining in the European Union. And we overlapped with the keywords, the policies with the keywords and the main topics. The last one is the Greece with the historical timeline and the laws with the main public policies. And this is what we try to do, to compare the four main moments in the history related for each country to the main public policies measure. And we did also a little meeting 2 weeks ago, maybe, and we started to compare our cluster, and we we started to ask to everyone the specific country topics, and we find, I'm going to ask to talk about it also in the workshop. So I'd like to be very to explain in very quickly way, but at the end of this little meeting, we find, for example, that we have some comparison aspect that is common to all the country, the promoting of ownership, and then we also try to have some idea to the workshop today, and also for the narrative group, for example, to focus on the last 30 years. Change, talking about also the changes in the demographic framework, and try to have a strong identity for the narrative group. And this is just to start to compare. I don't know if there is now the second cluster.
Yes. And I have to check if this is. Yeah, I don't think. Yeah. Yes, I'm sharing. No, I'm just looking for if the person who should present is there or not.
Yeah. What is the name?
Yusufi.
Is that?
Yeah. Sorry?
That is no.
Because it's not from Macedonia, but they are members in the action from the Bosnian Montenegro. You didn't receive from Macedonia as well, but we are.
So no, he's not there. So I will.
Understand? Yeah. So Macedonia, Croatia also didn't contribute.
Yes, that's right.
Yes. Bosnia and Montenegro, yes. They are in the same group. Yes. Although they didn't contribute as well as Croatia. So,
yes, we will also.
Yes. Okay.
Yes. So we don't have the representative here because he's probably busy with some lectures at the moment. So I will just quickly go through, first of all, just to tell you what we have so far and what is missing. So as you can see, something like the policies from these countries are missing, as you pointed out. But also, this is the work from Yusufi. So I don't have the detailed overview of what exactly the policies were like for Slovenia, and I think the person who's representing could.
Somebody from Slovenia?
No.
METU was online, but still.
No, not
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah. So yeah, but just to give you an overview of how much work has already been done and what we expect. And of course, we had a very detailed policies from Slovenia, and also I think USP could interact in private meetings. And so at least the beginning of the historical and the policy timeline is there. Then this is the case for Serbia, and we have received the policies like I think maybe last week or something like that. So he still has to work on it, and he still has to develop. Yeah. Then we come to
the previous case. A large segment in the previous cluster, a large segment of the information would be more or less the same, because we were part of one country,
yeah.
Although there were differences among the republics. So probably because we are moving in the 21st century with the policies, then we can certainly show the differences. But the initial section more or less depends where we begin, because there were different points in time when you begin with the historical events. But the initial segment would be more or less the same for all the countries there. And then later we can show the differences.
Yeah. Okay. I will note that down. And, yeah.
Why did it start from the beginning of the century? I've seen, for instance, Portugal. There were information data from the 30s of the 20th century.
Because in the discussions that we had, not only in working group 3, but in general within this cost action over time, we noticed that some of the results that were produced after the war, it's right, the focus of this action is on post-war mass housing, but we noted that some of the policies go back to the time before. They are rooted, they were still in law, or they were still existing, and also that many of the concepts, the housing concepts, the plans, the layouts are based before. So this is why we thought it is worth having a look of what happened. And we know that, for example, of course, the 1920s and 30s were often in many countries quite decisive. And now if we talk about the history, we would also find that there could be a lot of similarities maybe between former Yugoslav, now Balkan countries and Europe, you know.
68 is almost.
Yeah, and it doesn't say that we will in the end, the focus is still on that, but we thought that it is important to look at some important events, because that might be architects in terms of biography, that might be policies, or that might be cases and examples that date back from that time. And it's not sure how in the end we will present it as a result, you know. It could be that we will cut it or not, but at least we, in some cases, we came back to that period, and then we just decided to start. But of course, focus is on the time after the war.
Should I say statement? No. Should I? Yeah. So then we come to the cluster 3, which is Central Europe, where we have Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. And the person who was helping us with the visualization work is no longer be able to support us.
Slovakia?
Yeah. So I'm just presenting the work that he did before leaving our team. He was based in Switzerland, in Zurich, so that's why we have policy and historical timeline from Switzerland. And then there was a discussion about in Switzerland, it's very, separate, like the French part and the German part and the Italian part. They have very district level policies, housing policies. So it's very difficult to have a national timeline or a national housing policy timeline. And so this was his proposal to work on Zurich separately. And probably they had some data for Zurich, but now this is for open discussion later on, not right now, but later on, from you and Jennifer. Yes, if you can suggest something, and if somebody else has opinion or suggestion on how we go about the Central Europe. Then he also worked on the Austrian historical timeline and the policy timeline, but this is not complete. This is half-baked cake, kind of. So we still have to find more details on it. And as we know, the case for Germany, especially the historical timeline, is very complicated to put it in under like one single bar. So we still have to work on it, how to separate it from the East and the West Germany. So it's work in progress and has to be continued from here on. And now I would invite Ahmed for presenting the French and the Belgium and the Netherlands case.
So thank you very much. So thank you very much. I want also to thank Professor Bernard Roman and Benjamin Leclerc, Céline, and Lidwin for contribution to this cluster. So we start with France, and the modern history of France started with the Human Rights Declaration in 1789, and here we have the main historical event which are linked to the public policies in France, mostly. We have also in 1870 the Commune of Paris, which proclaimed the first right of housing and the born of the Third Republic. After, in the last of the 1881, we have Algeria, which was colonized in 1830, but became at this time a full department of the France country. And it's this difference between Algeria and the other colonies of France. We have also the occupation in the Second World War, and we have also the born of the Fourth Republic after the independence, and also the comeback of de Gaulle to France after the events of 13 May in the 58. And we have also the most important event, which is the appeal of the Abbé Pierre in 1954 in the winter, where a lot of homeless person died in this winter. And this appeal had a big impact in the history of the construction in France after. And at the last, we have a succession of policies from different position of government, from right and left, succession of from right and left political position. And at last, we have the COVID crisis, the health crisis, in the world crisis. Regarding the policies, the first most important policies in France was the creation of the social museum in the 1894. And this social museum was created the first social housing, which was called at this time the HBM. And also the garden cities in France. After, in the 1908, we have La Loi Ribot, which developed this law regarding the social housing to the rural cities, to the rural country, for reducing the rural exodus to the big cities. And regarding the mass housing, we have, I think, the most important laws with the new town policies in the 70s, and after at the end of in the 60s, sorry, and after in the 70s, the circular Guichard, which proclaimed the end of mass housing in France. And after we have also in the last period of, in the first period of the 80s, the law regarding the decentralization. We have the same kind of law in Europe, for example, what presented Luisa for Italy, and also we will see for Belgium, but it's different for France because the public policies still became national, mostly national, than Italy and the Netherlands, which were, sorry, and Belgium, where it became mostly regional and not national policies. We have also in the beginning of the 2000, La Loi SRU, which had a big social impact with it make mandatory for each city to have 20% of social housing. And after with in 2004 with La Loi Bourlot, we changed the strategy. At first we have a production strategy, but with this new law, France entered mostly in urban renewal strategy. We have the old part and we need to renew it. And at last, we have, sorry, it's not very clear, but La Loi Elan here in 2018, which introduced a new component, which is the numeric, and the numeric, and impacts a lot also on how to say the work of the architect. It's so regarding the most important policies, we have 3 periods regarding the production. The first period where the employer, the patronal community, which create the laws. After, with the appeal of the l'Abbé Pierre, it's the state who take the control, and after with the 70s and the creation of the new region, the direction plan, we have a collaboration between a renewal collaboration between patronal community and the state. For the spaces, we have 9 meters square for an apartment, and we start with 30 meters square for home single families. And the surface for single families homes, it depends about the number of the rooms. For the price, for the only for the social park, the social park for it's we have the average of 591 euros for the meter square. And regarding the energy efficiency, the rental private park is the most energy deficient, and almost also the old buildings. Regarding the Netherlands, the contemporary history start with the creation of the Kingdom of Netherlands with William Frederick. And we have also some events which mark the history of Netherlands with the 2 crises, oil crisis, and also the integration of the European Union. Yeah. So, yeah. We need also to complete the information. And for Belgium, It's the same history, but we have to resume for Belgium. We have two big periods. The first period, which was national policies before 1989, and after we have a more local and policies. For the moment, we collected mostly with Benjamin Leclerc some information for the Brussels region. Sorry. And regarding the Met Square, it depends of the number of child, and it's starting. If I don't, Celine, start with what is Celine? Sorry. Okay. So we need to continue. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think we don't even have Yanuela at the moment. So maybe I will go on with this again.
Okay. I think it's just
just to show that what we have been doing and where we are and where we have to go. So for the Baltic states, initially we had the discussion, whether to discuss Russia or not, because she was working on the Russian policies for all this time, and we have quite a good information on Russian case. But then, we decided not to present that, and so she basically worked on the Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia case. However, I was really hoping that she joins us today because it would be nice to introduce her. She has been a very active member also throughout our visual team. Yes, so she basically worked on Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania by herself because we didn't really get any feedback from the country representatives, and we don't even have detailed policies so far. So I would request the people who are here, all the members, that please, if anybody is from Latvia and Estonia and Lithuania, please help us, not like immediately, but later on, to give us more data and feedback on this work. And yes, so she did her own personal research to find out the living standard, the economical dynamics of the housing policies during the Soviet period. Yes, and then we have the former socialists, which is actually the countries that I was working on, so I have to be here again. And we studied Poland, Hungary, and Romania. We are still missing data for Slovakia. And so just to quickly go through, for Romania, we had a very detailed policy. So thanks to Stefan Darkos, because otherwise I wouldn't have come up with so many different aspects and analysis if I didn't study that document. So it was really nice. And of course, this is one of the baselines that we considered to start for other countries, because we had a lot of information about the historical and the policy data. And maybe later we get into, what was exactly happening, because if I start with that, it will take the whole evening probably. And same for Hungary. And we have Professor Melinda here, and we will discuss this, and we will also discuss how probably we can compare these countries later on. But yes, so this is the present moment. This is where we are at the moment. And for Poland, again, we had some conversation and we were trying to get more information, but yeah, we still have to work on it later on. And this is the current status. Yeah, so these were the three aspects which I showed in the beginning, like, when we were discussing about density and living standards and all, energy efficiency. And we, me and the cluster representatives, we sat down one day and we were trying to discuss if, this even makes sense for the socialist countries. And the impression was no. And that we have to come up with different aspects of comparison, because in the socialist countries, there was a total different way of development in terms of housing. And so there was a suggestion by Magdalena about that we should look into, the dwelling and the more statistic data. But again, we have to go further on this, and we have to really come up with how we can compare these countries further. Yes, so we jump to Mediterranean, and yes, thanks for Merrick to join us, and maybe she will. Can you unmute yourself?
Yes, I am
Okay,
unmuted, I
great.
guess. Hello.
Great. So I will just.
Should I begin?
Can you share, Merrick?
Yeah,
Yeah, because you stopped sharing the presentation, so probably you have to share your screen.
Oh, okay.
Just share and have to share. But if she has,
Yeah.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Merit and I'm responsible for Mediterranean countries, which involved Cyprus, Turkey, Malta, Algeria, and Israel. But at this point, we have only data for Cyprus and Turkey, so I will mainly be talking about them. Let me. Okay, so we begin with the historical timeline of Cyprus, starting from Cyprus being a British colony towards its gaining its independence, and then all the other important events and milestones in Cyprus history. And then we tried to overlap it with the policy collected so far. So the policy data actually here reveals some patterns. Like, for example, we can see a density between like 1972 towards 1990s, or there's a gap on data for policies before 1955. So this kind of overlap actually shows us like where there are, if there are any gaps or if there are any like information relevant. And moving on to the other country, Turkey's historical timeline, we also wanted to include another set of like periods which are specific to Turkey's political history, like early Republican period and multi-party period. And because each of these periods actually have their own, let's say, keywords or key issues which might be important to the mass housing, or which might be important for the policy generation, basically. And at the slide, we also see an overlap of policy data in line with historical timeline for Turkey. Again, we might see some patterns here as well. For example, there's a density of policies between 1926 towards 1935, and then there's again a gap between 1935 till 1969. So maybe this could be an area which I might focus on in the future to see if there are any relevant policies as well to fill in that gap. It is again a draft, a work in progress, let's say, to compare the countries. However, yeah, since at this moment we only have information on Cyprus and Turkey, these are their policy patterns compared, basically. And as Kritika had mentioned, we had decided, we had proposed several themes, key aspects to compare these countries, like income groups, address, living standards, etc. And this slide actually just representing the data gathered from Professor Byron on Cyprus's like minimum living standards when it was defined, like for example, the minimum living standards for Cyprus were mainly defined in the local plans issued after 1990 planning law. like it is just to show what kind of information was obtained when in this timeline, but it is again a work in progress, and maybe maybe these themes or these key aspects may change as we collect more information too. So for the rest of the countries, I'm still waiting for data, basically. So
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
So thank you. I think that was the last now presentation from the clusters. It doesn't, there are some countries that are still missing. This was correct because we first started with the policies we had received and then we clustered some around, and it's true some countries are missing, but you will all have the opportunity afterwards in the workshop where we go into groups, into the clusters. I don't know how many groups we do. Maybe we will see later if it is 3 or 4. So also to make your comments, because we have noticed that you saw some mistakes. Yeah, this is clear. I mean, all these are young people, so they referred on the data. So if you have any corrections or comments, this will be possible just afterwards to do. But before we go to the workshop, we still have 2 points. So we welcome Bernard Aumont, who were brought up the topic on the single family housing. And I know that was discussed, and we are lucky to hear your input and curious what you have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I would like very much today to not to push some reflections, but to push some questions about the places and the parts of the family house in middle class, because no, what? Okay, because if we are looking at the social housing in Europe, we can see that in some countries the part is very weak. For instance, in Spain or in Portugal, 2%, 3%, and it means that middle-class people are living outside. At the opposite, some countries like the Netherlands have a high part of social housing. So we have two questions we have to look for first, and we have 2 questions about the type of housing and flat or single family houses. Secondly, we have to look for the housing occupation status of tenant or owners, and at the last and not the least, about the financial programs to promote home ownerships. So if we are looking, it is a statistic from Eurostat. If we are looking where people are living in a flat, single attached house or detached house, we can see in orange flat, in blue attached house, and in red detached house. And we can see that in many countries, the part for single family houses is very important. In the middle is about 43% for the European communities. And for the Serbia, it's not the last in the track, because Serbia is 87% in home owners. So we make some case, of course, but we can see, I don't know if you can see the list of the country, but it is the countries are clustered by the part of each one. And if we are looking at the second important finding, it's about home owners in Europe. And we can see that also it is higher than 50% in all Europe. It means that the majority of people are owners and not tenants. With some extreme values, Romania, Hungary, Poland, it's after the post-socialist period, of course, but Germany at the back of the track is 51. It means even in Germany, majority of people are owner of the home. And if we try to cross the findings about owners, tenants on one hand, and flat and a single house on the other hand, we can see that the part is very important, because even in this country, despite the difference between countries, a large part of the middle class inhabits single family house, and with a part of owners, of course, and a part of tenants, which are not the same, but tenants in flats and near the trip in those of house. So we can have some questions about where the middle class is living, because it means that most of the middle class is living owner or tenants in single family house in Europe. And if we are looking at the French case, it is the case I know the most. We can see that even during the years of large public efforts for the collective dwellings, the French housing policies do not give up the head for individual housing. So you can see that the single family house in 55, a third of the total production, but in 1977, more than the majority, 57. And even in HLM building, it means in social buildings, the home buyers are important, because you can see that in 74, more than the majority was home buyers in compared to tenants. It means that even if social building like HLM, the home buyers are increasing more quickly, more rapidly than tenants. And that it seems to me that it is an important turn in France, but probably in Europe in large, that the way and the push for ownership is going forth and more forth in the years. And here some a diagram showing the single family house in the French case and the growth rates. In blue, all together buildings. In yellow, single houses, and in gray, collective housing. And you see that until the crisis in 28, the family house are increasing more quickly, more rapidly than for collective dwellings. So, in the beginning, after the reconstruction period and the years for the large collective buildings with the grand ensemble and urbanism area in priority, there is some change in the policies. And it's 1966, for instance, there is a national competition organized by the House Ministry. Some 20 teams, architects and builders, were selected to settle family house with a reception house and a small school. And that exhibition should galvanize acquisition candidates and to show all the possibilities, all the capacities of single family house contrasting with collective house. So the aim of the exhibition was to promote the, was to promote the purchase of family house, and there are strong links with what we call some housing cultural scheme. It means by that the single family home is offering more capacities, more opportunities to develop practice in house, in practice, in family practice, in home, and with a relation with in and out space, about clean and dirty space, and so on. And so the kind of single family house is much more dealing with the housing cultural scheme, at least in France. And the exhibition we showed just before has been so successful that the similar show were organized the next year near Toulouse, Bordeaux, Saint-Médard, Nantes, and so on. And in that way, in 1969, the same ministry, Albin Chalandon, developed a program for affordable house, less than at the time 100,000 francs. It means a small money part for the people, and it means that many low income could buy some small houses. About 60,000 houses were built from 1969 to 1972, and nevertheless, the bad quality of these homes shortly appeared, and the program was dropped. And there is some injurious term for this kind of house called the chalendonnet. We saw that this morning with a lexicon about the chalendonnet specific houses for low-income people. And the financing channels of the housing policies were continuously modified without forgetting that the ownership is more and more important. I think even more and more dominant in the way to deal with houses. In the 60s and the 70s, the public financing reorganization in favor of the HLM sector and social housing, but in the same time, there is an establishment of housing saving plans and long-term bank loans with the growing roles of the Crédit Foncier de France for the house purchase. I mean by that, that on one hand, there are some efforts for collective housing and social housing, but on the other hand, there is some kind of efforts for ownerships and single family homes. And in the 60s and the beginning of the 70s, there is a turn in the policies about housing in France. And in 1977, this turn was accentuated by the establishment of APL, Aide Personnalisée au Logement, individual houses assistance, with two modalities. Pertenance of one hand, it means for low or middle income families, but also for home buyers. So there is a public aid for home buyers, for low income or middle income, to buy houses and to buy majority in single family houses. And in 1995, establishment of the prêt à taux zéro, it means zero interest loan. It means that some families could have a loan from the bank without interest, and it was a kind of help to buy some home and to buy house. We should also add all the tax measures in favor of private investment housing, particularly in the tax allowance to ownership with the house, and all the tax the diminutions of tax for people buying their homes. So we have to see, I think now, to much more than until now, the place for the horizontal urban development. And besides the vertical urban development we saw yesterday or we saw 2 months ago in Paris. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Bernard. So I think this was really the reflection that came up in the discussion. And this is also a question now for the workshop that is going to start at 3:45 to discuss or to reflect this aspect really for each country, because we saw how different the perspectives are. But I know that also in the case studies and in some country groups, this aspect of single family houses was very much discussed. So we now have 5 minutes left from our work group meeting, which is just, I think, the right time. So it means there is no time for discussion left, but we have the workshop afterwards where we can have the discussions, and we will let you know at the beginning how many groups we will do. But I would like to give the floor to Müge, who will actually, or not? Yeah. Yeah, we'll just switch it. So to Müge, the co-chair, because we also still have the narrative group that has to be installed. So in addition to the visualizations, we also will have short text, because we cannot compare everything. It also needs individual stories, and Müge will introduce.
They have to go to the microphone. Okay. Yes. Okay, thank you very much, Uta. Well, thank you for, I'd like to thank to all our young colleagues who worked with us for the visualization of policies. They did a wonderful job, to be honest with you, Kritika, Luisa, Ahmed, Merit, and 2 other colleagues. So what we want to do, actually, if you look at these policies, you know, you can go through, obviously, if you want to read this graphics, but we want to make a very short, very brief narratives for each national policies, for each country's middle-class mass housing policies. The major milestones, the critical policy changes, we just need to name that, and some factors behind these policy changes. And if we have information, the critical actors, government actors, or very critical financiers, for example, establishments, just to make a quick, to grasp the policy changes in one nation's on middle-class mass housing. So this is not going to be a kind of academic paper, but a brief explanation what happened in one country as a nationwide, what kind of middle-class mass housing policies have been carried out through 20th century and the beginning of 21st century till now. So the critical idea now, because our young colleagues have been working on the visualization, we are seeking the help of colleagues who have already contributed to the visualization of policies from each country. As you can see, there are some names here. Credit goes to Laura, Luisa, and Federico. We also now would like to collaborate with them and other colleagues from the same country who want to contribute to the narratives. And we want to write a very brief text on these policies. Now we want to ask who would like to contribute. This is one thing. The second thing, as Uta mentioned, we have still some countries who haven't made any contribution on the national policies. We are still you know, welcoming all the colleagues who want to contribute to this national policy. So we want to, we also want to hear now and through emails as well, your contributions. So we have already established a core group for narratives. Byron, Benjamin, Yansira, Professor Bernard, and myself, we have started this core group. But if you would like to join the core group, please join us. Now it's a time for us to hear your, you know, your comments, your contributions. Really, it will. This is the time for us to hear your voices. Okay, thank you.
So.